Peace to you, everyone. Called in sick today. My shoulders give me some grief. Not a lot of work for the rest of the week either, funny enough. I, Business has been booming since January 1st, but oh well. So I wake up this morning and I'm seeing all these things on social media to do with basically how we was kings, blacks are the original samurai, and the original Romans, the original Greeks, the original Irish, the original Welsh, and of course the real indigenous Indians, right? And how apparently those that call themselves indigenous are actually a bunch of Siberian transplants, that they're not the real natives. Guys, this rhetoric is very dangerous. Just so you understand, this can help create further genocide of Indian tribes. Okay, it doesn't help that the Creek Freedman lawyer, Damara Solomon Simmons, is pushing this idea on at least 2 occasions on record. How when Columbus arrived, there was already Black Creeks, or how, the Creeks enslaved their Black Creek brothers so they can be like the white men with plantations. All that crap. It doesn't help. It doesn't strengthen Creek Nation. It doesn't strengthen any of the tribes to push this type of dangerous rhetoric. And it's all over the internet. All these Choctaw and Chickasaw groups are being flooded, absolutely flooded with this misinformation. Historical artwork, which is typically figurative, it's not always literal, okay? Like, you look at the Fort Mims massacre depictions, like, the depictions of whites and American soldiers is probably correct. But this 1880 or whatever, whenever, the depiction was made, they would have had, like, American military clothing to reference. But at that point, the Creeks weren't even dressed the same as they had been, 60 whatever years prior. So they're taking they're taking what they see the Plains Indians wearing and transposing that into what they portray the Creeks having worn during the Creek War. Okay. So you can't trust the historical depictions. You can't trust any depictions of William Weatherford, aka Red Eagle, who was even called Red Eagle while he was alive. They portray him as a noble savage with long flowing hair and feathers in his hair, and shirtless and wearing this like buckskin apron and buckskin leggings as he brings a deer as a gift for Andrew Jackson. Now, Andrew Jackson was portrayed correctly in that, but Weatherford was not. He wasn't dressed the way Creeks were actually dressed. There's not a single depiction of him dressed the way that we actually were dressed back in those days. And so all this stuff is from later. You got to look at why the artwork is being made. You look at all the George Catlin's portraits of Indian chiefs, and it's like he's trying to preserve a memory of what these people actually look like at that time. He had his vested interest is in preservation, not propaganda, and not simply a historical representation of what happened several decades in the past. Okay, so when you look at historical artwork and they're portraying the Indian savages, and you see this nappy hair, and you see what could be interpreted as being like African features. Who are they aiming this artwork towards? Obviously, these white guys were aiming it towards their European brothers, and they're showing this wild frontier and these savages with their nappy hair, kind of. And it's like, okay, well, who did the Europeans think of as savages? When they thought of savages, what did they think of? Because they never saw an Indian before. Well, they're going to portray it as an African, because that was their portrayal. Like, even the Moors, who didn't really look sub-Saharan African, are frequently portrayed in historical artwork and heraldry as looking like sub-Saharan Africans. This is propaganda. This isn't fact. This isn't proper depiction. So you have to look at the target audience of the artwork. And these Afrocentricists, we was kings, we're the real indigenous. All these who follow and subscribe to the lies of the Nation of Islam, the whole Yaqub who created the white race to basically vex his black brethren. And he did this like 40,000 years ago. And he created Christianity 10,000 years ago. Obviously, these people have never looked at a calendar or world history. The people that are pushing this, right, it's very dangerous. It's dangerous. They're uneducated. They're uneducated, and they're pushing propaganda that's actually going to hurt real Indian tribes. Now, look, okay, did we own slaves at one point? Some of us, yes, it's a fact. But does that still illegitimize our existence as a people? Does that illegitimize our right to exist as a sovereign nation? Should Muscogee Nation disappear if the freedmen don't exist? A lot of them think so. A lot of the freedmen think exactly that. Okay? Like, we don't have a right to exist at all if the freedmen aren't a part of that. It's like, no, we existed before the freedmen's ancestors came from Africa. They weren't already here. They were not already here, okay? Unless they got some mixed native ancestry, that may not be on record. Or maybe is. But their black ancestors came from Africa. That's a matter of fact. Like, there's no two ways about that. So, like, we got to tell real history here. But instead, there's all this pseudo history. People literally saying that Mozart was black. I have a coworker who is black who bought into this nonsense, and I'm like, no, Mozart wasn't black. He's like, basically, he believed that it was all propaganda. That he was like, any kind of depictions of him being white were basically lies. I'm like, look, I looked up this because I remember the Black Mozart. That jogged a memory in my mind because I've studied historical European fencing for a while. And there was a certain historical fencer who was referred to as the Black Mozart. He was called the Chevalier St. George. He was the second greatest swordsman in Europe at that time. He was very famous, even in England. They had, in Scotland, they had, well, definitely England for sure, in the Angelo Academy, Angelo, whose system I study, had a portrait of the Chevalier St. George. His dad was French, his mother was black, she was a slave. But I believe the Chevalier's first name was George, and he was educated, and his father was a nobleman. I mean, he was a bastard, but his father was a nobleman, so there was money to build up his life. Okay, and so, yeah, I mean, he had a good education. He was also so he was not only the second greatest fencing master in Europe, he was also a brilliant composer. They referred to him as the Black Mozart. But people hear that and they say, oh, a Black Mozart. They transpose it in their brain. It's like, Mozart was black. And then all of a sudden, now, apparently it's a big propaganda lie that Mozart was ever of European descent. I was looking at this recently. I have to double check this. Alexander Dumas, who wrote the Count of Monte Cristo, I think he might have been the son of St. George. I double check that. He was a quadroon, as I recall. Like, he was a quarter black. His father was considered, whose father was half black. I think it might have been the Chevalier St. George. I double check that though. Don't quote me on that. I'm quoting myself here. I'm making this video, but so there's other people that are famous that were part black or who were black. You don't have to steal the history of an actual, like, of like a European person that's white. You don't have to steal their history to make yourself feel better. You don't have to be, just because Yasuke, who was an African slave, by the way, who made his way to Japan as a slave and was freed and became a samurai, just because he was a samurai does not mean that all the original samurai were black. The Japanese were originally black. There's one person mentioned, I think, in Chinese mythology as being black, and all of a sudden that must mean that the Chinese were all black originally. It's like, no, it doesn't mean that at all. Okay, like this whole, like, Afrocentric depiction, or this history, this pseudo-history of, well, we had this master culture, this supreme, amazing super culture back in the day, And then the Caucasians came out of the Caucasus Mountains, and they stole everything from us, and so did the Asian barbarian, whatever, these Mongolian, Siberian, blah 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 blah. Okay, this is what's being propagated in the Afrocentric vein of so-called natives, freedmen, and even just Black Americans in general. This idea is spreading, and it's dangerous. It's dangerous because it's not true. None of this stuff is true. The original Irish, look, my hair is curly. It's because of my Irish ancestry. I'm not a full-blood Creek, obviously. Oh, the Irish have curly hair, therefore they were black. The Welsh, they were swarthy with curly hair. That must mean they were also black originally. And then they pushed this idea. Okay, they're pushing this stuff out there like it's the truth. That skeleton that was found in the UK, they say, oh, look, it must have been black. There's a couple of them, actually. One of them turned out the DNA was white. The other one, it turns out it was a quarter black, which means that, like, the ancestry was very recently, like, there was recent black admixture. It wasn't like, oh, these people were always originally black, like the BBC making their own, trying to be anti-racist. They're portraying, like, half the Celts in Britain as being black and half as being white, and the same with their depiction of Romans. And it's just like, it's just not correct. It's just not true. I'm sorry. Like, so yeah, the BBC programming didn't really help. So this is the thing. We got to be very careful, but it's all over the place. And it's too early in the day to argue with idiots. And unfortunately, there are a lot of uneducated African Americans who buy into this propaganda. And there's even educated African Americans who buy into this stuff. And it's like, historical artwork can be figurative. You have to look at who the target audience is. You always got to look at who the target audience is. Same with historical accounts. You got to look at who the target audience is. Because if you don't, then you're going to get some type of, probably erroneous idea about the purpose of it and whether the information is even correct. So, for example, of what might be more correct is you have a Spanish friar. I can't remember. There's a few, from Mexico who, well, not from Mexico. They were from Spain, but they went to Mexico and they saw depictions of atrocities against natives, and it's like their reason for writing that wasn't to make the savages look bad. It was to make their own people look bad who were doing bad things to natives, right? You have to look at things like that and say, okay, well, why would they have said this against their own people? Maybe because they themselves are not bad people, but these other dudes were. Okay, and they want this stuff to stop because it's evil. Maybe that's why. Okay, so, but at the same time, disparaging accounts are not always inaccurate. I mean, Julius Caesar said that the British Celts were doing ritual human sacrifice. And then these Victorian era people who were like, with the Celtic revivalism were like, oh no, this is just propaganda. This is the conquered dehumanizing, this is the conquerors dehumanizing the conquered. Well, then they found the bogmen. It turns out that they were obviously ritualistically sacrificed and tossed into a bog. And then it turns out, well, Julius Caesar must have been telling the truth. So that means that Cortez's, the accounts of the Aztecs doing human sacrifice are probably all correct as well. But as far as like the average Indian in Mexico that was being like raped by Spaniards and things like that, yeah, when those accounts are there and they're written by Spaniards especially, like, you better believe that stuff's true. Okay, like, just saying. So you got to look at the purpose, what the apparent purpose behind the account, the apparent purpose and target audience of both the written account, the artwork, all that stuff. Okay. We got to be very careful because statistics could be forged. It happens in business all the time today. So, yeah, anyway, be very careful out there. Okay, be very, very careful before you believe everything you see on the internet. Before you believe anything I just said right now, go look up all this stuff. Okay, look this stuff up. Okay, and then come back and say, James, you was wrong. Okay, or whatever. I mean, obviously you don't have to say was, but you should say were. You were wrong, James. Okay, like it's like we were kings, not we was kings. But anyway, yeah, go look the stuff up. And I'm not saying that history can't be revised from time to time. It should be. When more facts present themselves, we should revise history. The national myth cannot always be preserved in its original form, because there's going to be things that contradict that are contemporarily known at the time this stuff was written. When the propaganda is being written, they already knew that some of it was BS. Okay, and once we can prove that, we should prove it. We should show the truth, even if it hurts some of our feelings. Okay, but the truth has to be known, right? And so I'm trying to do that here. But go look it up. Don't believe me. Go fact check everything I'm saying. Fact check all of it. Okay, and I'll talk to y'all next time. But for watching, and hadam chi chaflis.